Nursery rhymes, they're just sweet, fun little stories, right? Wrong. From a jealous husband murdering his wife and hiding her in a pumpkin shell to a massacre disguised as a children's counting game, these nursery rhymes hide origins far more brutal than you ever imagined. Peter Pumpkin Eater had a wife and couldn't keep her. He put her in a pumpkin shell and there he kept her very well. The rhyme implies that Peter's wife, at best, has a sexual appetite that Peter can't keep up with and many admirers, or at worst has been having affairs or working as a prostitute. Out of jealousy, Peter decides to either place her under general house arrest or confine her within a small space in his home. Pumpkin shell doesn't sound like an area that leaves much room for roaming. Surprisingly though, that interpretation is actually the more innocent of the rhyme's potential origins. Another interpretation is that Peter murdered her by bricking her up in a wall somewhere. This other explanation came about for two reasons. First off, there is a related and very similar nursery rhyme sung to the same tune of Peter Pumpkin Eater. It goes, "Eeper weeper chimney sweeper, had a wife but couldn't keep her, had another, didn't love her, up the chimney he did shove her." This adorable description of domestic violence fell out of favor over the years for reasons that may seem obvious, but it's one of the reasons why people think that Peter putting his wife in a pumpkin shell is a metaphor for Peter actually doing something much more nefarious to his wife and hiding her body in a pumpkin. Some also point to the tale of King John, the King of England in the 13th century, who bricked a nobleman's wife into a wall because her husband had rebelled against him. This left the poor noblewoman to the grisly fate of starving to death behind a brick wall. Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty together again. Despite never being described as being egg-like in any way, Humpty Dumpty is usually depicted as an anthropomorphic egg that falls and splatters off the side of a wall. So you might be imagining that in the dark origin of the rhyme, Humpty Dumpty is instead a person who falls off a wall and horrifically breaks most of the bones in their body. A weird story for a group of preschoolers to all be singing about together and laughing. But what is it really about? It would be fitting, since according to Francis Gross's Classical Dictionary of the Vulgar Tongue, a book that just made our wish list, in 18th century England, Humpty Dumpty was slang for a short, clumsy person of either sex. And because of that, some people assumed that Humpty Dumpty was meant to portray King Richard III of England, widely depicted as a hunchback who was defeated alongside his armies in 1485. However, there is another, more widely accepted explanation of this nursery rhyme in which Humpty Dumpty is a canon. In the English Civil War, which took place between 1642 and 1649, the Royalists who supported King Charles I and the parliamentary forces supporting Oliver Cromwell fought each other for power. The Royalists were stationed at Colchester and had mounted several defenses on the city walls, including cannons, to defend themselves against parliamentary forces. One of those cannons was supposedly named Humpty Dumpty. After a barrage of incoming fire, the walls were heavily damaged and partly collapsed, sending Humpty Dumpty and most likely several other cannons tumbling off the wall to break apart on the ground. Since the cannon was a weapon of the Royalists, this would neatly fit in with their line about all the king's horses and all the king's men not being able to put it back together. Since the Royalists eventually lost the war altogether, the defeat the king's men suffered in the nursery rhyme makes sense. As for the king, his fate turned out to be even worse than Humpty Dumpty's when he was beheaded January 30th, 1649. So then it goes without saying that it would be very hard indeed to reassemble a cannon that had fallen several dozen feet, much less the decapitated king. This little piggy went to the market, this little piggy stayed home, this little piggy had roast beef, this little piggy had none, and this little piggy went wee 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 all the way home. At which point you traditionally end the nursery rhyme by tickling the child's foot with smiles and giggles all around. But the child might have a different reaction if they knew what was really going on here, that the rhyme is describing the process of fattening up pigs to take them to slaughter. The big toe, as the biggest piggy, goes to the market to be butchered. The second toe stays home because it's not quite ready for butchering yet. And the third one needs to be fattened up, which is why it's fed roast beef. The fourth one is too little to start fattening up as of yet, and that very last little piggy, well, it's left a little open to interpretation. Though none of the possibilities are very cheerful, the most likely explanation is that the last little piggy cries out after seeing the biggest pig slaughtered at the market, understanding that this will be its eventual fate. Or maybe it's just crying out in general fear. Either way, feel free to call up your parents and explain how deeply they traumatized you while playing with your toes as a baby. Ba ba black sheep, have you any wool? Yes sir, 3 bags full. 1 for the master, 1 for the dame, and 1 for the little boy who lives down the lane. While this sounds wholesome and relatively innocent, It should be noted that one of the original versions ended with, "and none for the little boy who cries down the lane," which just seems rude. Many interpretations of this rhyme explain that it's a metaphor for the government taking from the poor and giving to the rich, a reverse Robin Hood action of sorts. More specifically, since this particular rhyme is quite old, many sources point to it being written in 1731, though it theoretically could have been part of oral tradition before that. People think it could have originated all the way back from the Crusades. During medieval time, wool was extremely important since it was used to make cloth for textiles and plenty of other products of the time, necessary for keeping warm in rainy, dreary England. Thus, wool was one of the most valuable commodities of the time. In the 13th century, King Edward I decided to levy a new tax after he found the Crusades to be a much more expensive endeavor than he had anticipated. The tax, known as the Old or General Custom Tax, was levied on sheep farmers. The king got a third of the wool, the church got another third, and the farmer was theoretically left with the last third of the product he himself had cultivated. Following this interpretation of the rhyme, the master in the poem is the king, the dame is the church, and the boy is the shepherd who took care of the flock of sheep, sheared the wool, and yet somehow is left with only a third of it. However, given that the original lines say that the crying boy gets none of the wool, we're not sure how much the farmers were actually allowed to keep in practice. The good news is that this severe tax was so unpopular that it only stayed in effect for 2 centuries. Rub-a-dub-dub, 3 men in a tub. And who do you think they be? The butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker, and all of them out to sea. Your first understandable question may be, why are these various tradesmen all bathing together in a tub floating out into the ocean? Well, it might help you understand the rhyme if you hear the original version, which makes the initial meaning of this verse clearer and more suggestive. It went, "Hey rub-a-dub-ho, rub-a-dub 3 maids in a tub. And who do you think were there? The butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker, and all of them gone to the fair." You see, in the 14th century, carnivals were less about cotton candy and Ferris wheels and more focused on unseemly activities. The word tub used to describe a part of a carnival that had young women bathing together in the nude and also, well, enjoying each other while doing so. Men would pay to swing by and stare at the activities in a primitive version of OnlyFans. So the rhyme was intended as a warning to young children to not pay for sexual entertainment, which we didn't think 7-year-olds needed to be warned about, but who's to say what the norm was in ye olden days? Those were all the dark nursery rhymes we discovered today, though we already have another full video of nursery rhymes with equally dark and disturbing origins for you to check out, or watch this video instead.